The gas line under Ashcomb's 5th Street construction pit blew at 6:14 in the evening, and I had my burned hand wrapped in a dish towel and my good hand elbow deep in suds when the floor of Maddie's diner jumped hard enough to crack a plate off the counter. 26 years old. Line cook, sometimes waitress. Permanently, the woman customers stared at when my sleeve rode up. My name is Wren Calloway, and for 5 years I had been very good at making myself small. The blast rattled the front windows. Steam and dust rolled down the block like a held breath finally let go. Every instinct I had spent 5 years burying came up through my chest at once, sharp and familiar, and before I had decided anything, I was already moving toward the smoke instead of away from it. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll tell you exactly what she saw in my hand that made the coldest woman in this city stop breathing. The pit was a mess of torn scaffolding and men shouting numbers that didn't match. A security guard in a black Draeger Group jacket was down near the fence, leg pinned under a fallen strut, blood dark and spreading through denim. Nobody near him was doing anything but yelling for an ambulance that was, someone kept saying, 11 minutes out. 11 minutes. I had learned a long time ago what 11 minutes could cost. I dropped to my knees in gravel that bit through my jeans, my scarred hand finally out of its towel and into the light, and I did not think about who was watching. I found the femoral point and pressed. I talked the guard through his own breathing, the way I once talked frightened patients through theirs, counting out loud, 4 in, hold for 4, out for 6, until his eyes stopped rolling white at the edges. Someone get me a belt. Now, my voice came out steadier than I felt. A construction worker fumbled his off, and I cinched it 2 inches above the wound, checked the pulse at the ankle, found it thin but there. Stay with me. Say your name. Dale, he managed. Dale Ostrowski. Dale, you're not dying tonight. I need you to believe me, even though I have no right to promise that. A shadow fell over the gravel, tall and still, and the crowd around us went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the accident. I looked up because I had to, because something in the air had changed the way it does right before weather turns, and found a woman in a charcoal coat standing at the edge of the wreckage like she'd been carved there. I would learn her name inside the hour. The city already knew it. Cassia Draeger. The Ember Queen, the papers called her, for rebuilding 6 burned blocks of Ashcombe into glass and steel with her own 2 hands and her family's fortune, for never once flinching in front of a camera, a rival, or a fire marshal. She was flinching now. Her eyes had gone to my right hand, wrapped around the belt-turned tourniquet, ridged and pink and unmistakably burned from wrist to second knuckle, and something moved through her face that no press photograph had ever caught. Not disgust, something closer to the floor dropping out from under her. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. The strut's still shifting," I said, because someone had to, because she was standing exactly where a beam could fall. She didn't move. For 3 full seconds, the most powerful woman in the city stood over an accident scene and looked like she was drowning on dry land. "Ma'am." "Cassia," she said, and it took her visible effort to make her voice come out level. "Not ma'am." Cassia, her gaze had not left my hand. "You know what you're doing." I used to. The ambulance siren finally cut through the distance, closing fast. Someone taught me once that 11 minutes is a lifetime if you use it right. She crouched then, ruining a coat that probably cost more than my rent, and looked at Dale Ostrowski's face instead of mine. "You're going to be fine, Dale. I'm not leaving until they load you." "You know his name," I said, surprised into it. "I know everyone's name." Her eyes came back to mine, and up close I could see the effort it cost her to hold my gaze instead of my hand. "What's yours?" "Wren." "Wren." She said it like she was setting it down somewhere careful, somewhere it wouldn't get lost. Where did you learn to do that? I almost lied. 5 years of practice had made the lie sit ready on my tongue. Instead, I looked at Dale's steadying breath, at the belt holding, at the thing in me that had woken up tonight and refused to go back to sleep. Nursing school, I said. A long time ago. The paramedics arrived in a wash of red light and noise, and hands that weren't mine took over the pressure, and I sat back on my heels in the gravel feeling suddenly and completely exposed, my burned hand bare in front of half of 5th Street, with no towel left to hide it in. Cassia Drager did not look away from it once. That was extraordinary, she said, low, only for me. Where do you work? Maddie's Diner. 2 blocks down. I gestured with my chin, my good hand still slick with someone else's blood. I should get back. My shift isn't over. Your shift is over. She was already reaching into her coat, producing a card with nothing on it but a name and a number, no title, no company seal, as if she'd decided titles didn't matter here. Come to the Spire tomorrow morning. Ask for me directly. I have a job. You have a talent you're burying under dish soap. Her eyes dropped to my hand one more time, that same flinch moving through her jaw before she mastered it. I don't know what happened to you. I intend to find out. 9 o'clock. Ren, don't make me send a car. She stood, coat swinging, and walked back toward a convoy of black vehicles that had gathered at a respectful distance, and I sat in the gravel with a stranger's blood on my hands and a plain white card between 2 fingers, watching the coldest woman in Ashcombe disappear into the dark with my name still sitting careful in her mouth. I didn't sleep that night. I kept seeing her face in the half-second before she'd caught herself. The half-second that told me, more than any newspaper ever had, that whatever the Ember Queen was afraid of, it looked exactly like my hand. The spire took up an entire block of glass, so clean it looked poured, rather than built 60 floors of Drager Group stacked over the exact street where, 5 years before I ever set foot in this city, an entire warehouse district had burned to the ground. I found that out from a security guard's idle comment while I waited in a lobby that smelled of cold stone and rain. Nothing like Maddie's grease and coffee, and I found myself wondering, not for the last time, what it cost a person to build a monument directly on top of their own worst night. Cassia met me at the elevator herself, which the guard's face told me was not typical. She wore gray instead of yesterday's charcoal, sleeves crisp to the wrist, and when the doors closed around us, I caught it for the first time, the scent under the recycled elevator air, black tea steeped too long in rain on hot stone. Cold and steady, and entirely her. I didn't know yet that I would spend the next 3 months learning to read that scent like a second language. You didn't sleep, she said, not a question. Neither did you. A ghost of something crossed her mouth, not quite a smile. Fair, the elevator climbed through 30 floors of glass and money while my reflection tried and failed to look like it belonged. It didn't. Neither did I. I want to be direct with you, because I don't have patience for the alternative. Dale Ostrowski is in stable condition because of what you did last night. I checked. Femoral bleeds kill people in under 10 minutes without exactly the intervention you performed, correctly, under pressure, with strangers screaming around you. I got lucky with the belt. You didn't. She turned to face me fully, and up close her eyes were the flat gray of a sky before snow. I run a foundation attached to this company, Ashcombe Medical, 3 clinics and a research wing, chronically understaffed because I have spent 5 years too consumed with steel and permits to fix it properly. I need someone to run triage and staff training at the flagship clinic. I need someone who doesn't panic when the numbers turn bad. I don't have a license anymore. The words cost me more than I expected. It was revoked 4 years ago. I know. Her jaw tightened, the only outward sign she'd done her research before I'd even reached the lobby. I also read your training record before it. Top of your surgical cohort, 2 commendations, 1 dismissal that reads like it was written to protect someone who wasn't you. You looked into me overnight. I look into everyone who bleeds in front of me and knows exactly what to do about it. The elevator chimed, opened onto a floor of glass offices and hushed activity. I'm not offering you a license back, Ren. I'm offering you a room full of scared, undertrained people who need exactly what you did for Dale last night. The pay will make your diner job look like a joke. Housing is included if you want it. The 3rd floor of my residence has a full clinical suite I built and never properly staffed. You want me to live where you live. I want competence in my building. Where you sleep is your choice entirely. Something flickered behind the flat gray, gone before I could name it. Say yes before you talk yourself out of it. I thought about Maddie's diner, the tips that never quite covered rent, the glove I wore on the good days, and the sleeve I pulled down on the bad ones. I thought about Dale Ostrowski's pulse steadying under my palm, and how it had felt, for the first time in 4 years, like being myself again, instead of a smaller, safer, sorrier version. Yes, I said. She exhaled, short and controlled, like she'd been braced for the opposite answer. Good, she extended her hand to shake on it, the way people in her world sealed things, and I hesitated half a second too long before offering mine, the burned one, because it was closer. She didn't flinch this time. She held it a beat longer than the handshake required. Thumb resting light over the ridged scar tissue at my wrist, and her scent shifted around us, warmed at the edges the way black tea steeped in sun instead of shade, and I felt the change in her before I understood what it meant. Whatever happened to this hand, she said quietly, I am going to need to know eventually. Not today. Whatever happened to make you flinch at it, I said, surprising myself. You don't owe me that either. Not today. For the first time since I'd met her, Cassia Drager looked like she wanted to laugh and didn't quite remember how. 3rd floor, she said instead, releasing my hand. Mrs. Odell will show you the residence tonight. Welcome to the Spire, Ren Calloway. The residence occupied the top 4 floors of the tower, and the 3rd floor clinical suite was, as promised, fully equipped and entirely unused, dust sheeting over an exam table that had never once held a patient. Mrs. Odell, silver-haired and brisk in a cardigan, the color of oatmeal, walked me through it with the practiced patter of someone who had given this tour before, and never once to anyone who stayed. Miss Drager built this the year she took over the company, Mrs. Odell said, running a cloth along a countertop that didn't need cleaning. Said she wanted a doctor in the house at all times, never filled the position. 5 people have tried. What happened to them? Nothing happened to them, dear. They simply weren't right. She folded the cloth with the finality of someone closing a subject. You'll want the East Suite, better light in the mornings, and you'll want to eat something you look like you haven't in a day. The kitchen on the residential floor was larger than my entire apartment, all brushed steel and cold marble, and utterly bare of anything resembling a person who used it for pleasure. I found eggs, found bread going stale in a drawer, and out of a habit older than my burned hand, started cooking anyway. Because idle hands had never once done me any favors. Cassia found me there an hour later, coat gone, sleeves rolled, looking for all the world like a woman who had wandered into her own kitchen by accident. You cook, she said, staring at the pan like it was an unfamiliar species. I cook, and I stitch wounds. Diverse skill set. I plated 2 servings without asking if she wanted any, some instinct telling me she'd take it if it was simply given rather than offered. Sit down before you fall down. You've been on your feet since before I got here. I can smell the exhaustion on you. She sat. She ate 3 bites before she seemed to notice she was doing it, and something in her shoulders that had been braced since I'd walked in eased by degrees. Nobody cooks for me, she said, quiet, like an admission she hadn't planned on making. Mrs. Odell orders in. My mother believed feeding yourself was a weakness you outsourced. Your mother sounds exhausting. She was formidable. A pause, careful. She's also the reason I know exactly what it costs to build something out of nothing but will. She also taught me that softness gets people killed. I've spent a great deal of my life believing her. And now, Cassia looked at me across the kitchen island, gray eyes steady in a way that made my burned hand want to hide itself under the counter, and didn't. Now I'm sitting in my own kitchen, eating eggs a woman I met 18 hours ago cooked for me, and I can't remember the last time anything tasted like more than fuel. She set her fork down. I don't know what to do with that information yet. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. I said it gently, surprising myself again with how much I meant it. Eat your eggs, Cassia, she almost smiled. Almost. The clinic filled fast once word got around that the Ember Queen had finally staffed it properly. Within 2 weeks, I had 4 nurses under me, a supply chain that actually worked, and a waiting room that saw real patients instead of the skeleton crew of executives who'd used it as a glorified first aid station. I liked the work. I liked, more than I expected to, the particular quiet of Cassia appearing in the doorway some evenings, saying nothing, simply watching me close up the day like she was memorizing the shape of a life that ran on care instead of control. Not everyone welcomed me the same way. You're the charity case, said Marcus Voss, the company's chief operating officer, the first time we shared an elevator, his eyes dragging over my scarred hand with an expression I recognized from every hospital hallway I'd ever walked out of in shame. Diner cook playing doctor because our esteemed CEO has a soft spot for strays. I give it a month. I give it considerably less patience for you than that, I said, and stepped out at my floor before he could answer, my pulse loud in my ears. My scarred hand curled tight at my side the way it did whenever the old shame tried to climb back up my spine. I didn't tell Cassia. I told Junie instead, over the phone, my one tether back to Maddie's and the life I'd left 3 weeks ago. He sounds like a man who's never had a burn scar of his own to worry about, Junie said, blunt as ever. The clatter of the diner's dinner rush behind her voice. You good, Ren? Really good, or good like you tell me so I stop asking? Really good, I said, and meant it, and hated a little how surprised I was to mean it. She looks at my hand like it's a mystery she wants to solve gently. Nobody's ever looked at it like that. That's not nothing. No, I agreed, watching the city lights blur gold through the clinic window, thinking of gray eyes and the particular ache of black tea and rain on stone. It's really not. The first time Cassia touched the scar on purpose, not in passing, not by accident, was a Tuesday in the residence library, both of us pretending to read while a storm hammered the windows 60 floors up. She reached across the space between our chairs and turned my hand over in hers, tracing the ridged line from wrist to knuckle with a finger so careful it barely registered as pressure at all. Tell me to stop, and I will, she said, not looking up. I'm not asking you to stop. Her thumb paused over the worst of the scarring, where the skin had pulled tight and shiny and would never again lie smooth. How? I could have deflected. I had 4 years of practice deflecting. Something about the storm, or her voice, or the fact that she'd asked instead of assumed, undid the habit entirely. House fire, I said. I was 19. My mother's stove wiring was bad. The landlord never fixed it, and one night it finally caught. I got her out. The ceiling came down as I was pulling her through the kitchen door, and I turned my hand slightly under hers, caught the worst of it, holding a beam off her legs for the 4 seconds it took the neighbor to help me drag her clear. She lived. She lived. I went to nursing school 2 years later because I couldn't stop thinking about how close 4 seconds had come to being too many. I wanted to be the person who made 4 seconds enough for someone else, every time, on purpose. I watched Cassia's face, the careful stillness of someone bracing for a blow they already knew was coming. You flinch at fire. I've watched you do it twice now, sirens too, and once, I think, at the smell of a struck match in the kitchen last week. Her hand went very still on mine. Elara, she said, and the name came out like something long buried, finally breaking the surface. My bonded mate. We were building the Hollow Street warehouses into affordable housing, the first real project I ever ran without my mother's approval, and there was a fire. Faulty electrical, they said afterward, the kind of corner cutting my mother's company had cut for decades, and I swore I never would. Elara went back in for a crew of 3 workers still inside. She got all 3 out. Her voice had gone flat, controlled, the way mine used to go when I described my own worst night to strangers who didn't deserve the real shape of it. She didn't come back out herself. I was standing at the perimeter, exactly where I told you to stand back from at your accident, and I watched the building I designed collapse around the only person who ever made me want to be soft. Cassia, I built this tower on that exact block. Her eyes finally lifted to mine, gray gone glassy and fierce at once. Everyone calls it triumph, rising from ash and all the rest of it. I call it the only way I knew how to stay in that neighborhood without losing my mind entirely. A breath, unsteady, and then a woman with a burned hand knelt in gravel 2 blocks from where my wife died and saved a stranger's life like it cost her nothing. And I have not stopped thinking about you since. It cost me everything, that night with my mother, I said softly. It just turned out to be a price I was glad to pay. Maybe that's what you saw. Maybe her thumb moved over my scar once more, achingly gentle. I am not an easy woman to want, Ren. I control everything I can reach because the one night I couldn't control anything took the best thing in my life. I don't know how to be anything other than careful. I don't need you to be anything other than what you are. I turned my hand fully into hers, palm to palm, scar tissue and unmarked skin. I need you to keep being careful with this exact hand and nothing else. She kissed my knuckles then, slow, deliberate, right over the worst of the scarring, and the library seemed to hold its breath around us while the storm broke harder against the glass. Marcus Voss found out about the informal arrangement, Omega staffer, Alpha CEO, no contract, no announcement, simply 2 women learning each other in careful pieces, within the month, and he did not take it well. Everyone in this building knows what you are to her, he said, cornering me outside the clinic on a Thursday that had already run too long. A pity project with a sob story hand. You think you're the first pretty little wounded thing to climb into her orbit hoping to land somewhere soft? I think you should move, I said, before I lose my patience and remember exactly which of your medical records cross my desk every month. Marcus. His face went a shade paler than his usual smugness allowed. Careful, I am always careful. It's the only thing that kept me alive long before I met Cassia Drager. I stepped past him into the clinic, my burned hand steady on the door, and did not look back to see whether the threat had landed the way I meant it to. It had. I would understand exactly how much and how badly in 3 weeks' time when the flagship clinic's medication logs turned up doctored in my name, and every finger in the building pointed, with practiced ease, directly at me. The trouble started with a name I hadn't heard since the worst year of my life. Dr. Holt Ferris arrived at Ashcombe Medical as the Foundation's new clinical director on a Monday in October, installed by the board over Cassia's mild objection that she'd wanted to promote from within, and I nearly dropped a tray of supplies the moment he walked into the flagship clinic for his welcome tour. He didn't recognize me at first. 4 years and a burned hand had changed enough about me that I passed as a stranger for exactly the length of his handshake. Ren Calloway, he read off my badge, and something in his face shifted, slow and cold, memory surfacing behind his eyes, like a body rising in water. Calloway, I know that name. You should, I said, low enough that only he could hear it. You wrote the incident report that ended my career. Dr. Ferris, faulty wiring in the East Ward you'd been told about 6 times and ignored. Dr. Aletta Sten died pulling a patient clear because the fire suppression system you'd deferred maintenance on twice failed when it mattered. You needed someone to blame who wasn't the hospital's insurance liability. I was 22 and grieving my mentor and Easy. His jaw tightened, the same careful, controlled panic I'd once mistaken for guilt and had since learned, watching men like him for years, was only ever fear of consequence. That report was thorough and fair. That report was a lie with your signature on it, and we both know it. I kept my voice level, clinical, the register I'd trained myself into for exactly this kind of confrontation. I've been rebuilding a life out of the wreckage of it for 4 years. I'd suggest you stay out of my clinic, doctor, before I decide it's time somebody finally read that report properly. He left without another word. I told myself it was over. It was not over. 2 weeks later, the flagship clinic's controlled substance log came back from a routine board audit showing a pattern of discrepancies traced, cleanly and completely, to my login credentials, narcotics checked out and never administered. Patient charts altered after the fact, the kind of careful, damning trail that takes either real guilt or considerable expertise to build. Marcus Voss delivered the news himself in front of 4 staff members, with the particular relish of a man who has been waiting months for exactly this moment. Security will need to escort you out while this is investigated, he said. I did warn you, Ms. Calloway, that this arrangement wouldn't last. I never touched those logs. The system says otherwise. He gestured, and 2 guards I recognized from the lobby stepped forward, apologetic but firm. Miss Drager has been informed. She's requested you wait in her office. I walked through the building I had, for 3 months, allowed myself to think of as something close to home, past nurses who wouldn't meet my eyes and administrators who already had my replacement's name half-drafted, and found Cassia standing at her window with her back to the door, shoulders rigid in a way I recognized from the elevator our first day, the posture of a woman bracing for the floor to give out. Cassia, the board is demanding your immediate suspension pending investigation. She didn't turn around. Ferris presented the audit himself. He's requesting your medical credentials be permanently barred from any facility bearing the Drager name. I didn't do this. My voice cracked despite every effort to hold it steady. You have to believe that. I want to. She turned then, and the mask was back. The flat gray control I'd seen exactly once before at the accident site, before she'd let herself flinch in front of a stranger. I need you to understand what it costs this company, and me, if I override a board audit for personal reasons, and it turns out I was wrong to trust you. Cassia, the word came out smaller than I meant it to. Ask me. Ask me anything. I will not lie to you. I know Ferris. Her jaw was tight enough to ache just watching it. I know his type. I have spent my entire adult life around men exactly like him, and I still did not see this coming, which tells me either I am losing my grip on this company or I am too close to you to see clearly. I don't know which is worse. So which is it? I said, and heard my own voice go cold in a way it hadn't since the day the first hospital board stripped my license. You believe him, or you believe me? The silence stretched long enough to answer the question on its own. I have to let the investigation run its course, she said finally, and every word looked like it cost her something vital. I'm sorry, Ren, so am I. I set my badge on her desk, my hands steady, with a decade of practice hiding exactly how much they were shaking underneath. I hope the investigation finds what it's looking for. I already know it won't be me. I walked out of the Spire that evening past a lobby full of people who had, 3 months ago, watched me arrive as the woman who'd saved Dale Ostrowski's life, and now watched me leave in the particular hush reserved for the newly disgraced. Marcus Voss did not bother hiding his satisfaction. Cassia did not come down to see me out. I went to Junie's, because there was nowhere else left that felt like mine, and sat on her fire escape with a mug of coffee going cold in my burned hand, while the city glittered indifferent below. She didn't fight for you? Junie asked, incredulous, furious on my behalf in the way only an old friend can manage. She's protecting a company with 4,000 employees from a scandal her board handed her already wrapped in a bow. I stared at the scar on my hand, ridged and pink under the streetlight, the same hand that had once held a beam off my mother's legs and, 3 months ago, a bleeding man's femoral artery, and felt something in my chest that had gone quiet since I was 22 years old wake back up, sharp and furious. I have been the woman everyone doubts before. I am not doing it again without a fight. I didn't sleep that night either. I spent it instead going through 4 years of habit I'd never fully broken, the meticulous, obsessive documentation my mentor Dr. Sten had drilled into me before the fire that killed her, every shift logged, every discrepancy noted, every login timestamped against my own personal record, because a hospital had once tried to erase me with paperwork, and I had sworn, over her grave, it would never happen again, without a fight from my side of the ledger too. I still had my personal clinic logs from every shift at Ashcombe Medical. Every login, every timestamp, every controlled substance I had ever checked out, cross-referenced against my own handwritten record the way Dr. Sten had taught me, the exact hours I'd been standing at a patient's bedside while the doctored system logs claimed I'd been elsewhere entirely, in a supply closet that had no camera because Marcus Voss had, I would later learn, personally authorized its removal 8 months before I ever arrived. At 2:47 in the morning, staring at 17 mismatched timestamps that couldn't possibly belong to the same person, I understood exactly what I was looking at. Not a mistake. A frame, built with the same careful hand that had once buried Dr. Sten's death under a fabricated incident report, and I intended to make sure it was the last one Holt Ferris ever got away with. The fire alarm at Ashcombe Medical's flagship clinic went off at 11:52 the following night, and I was already 3 blocks away when Junie's phone lit up with the news alert, my heart dropping through the floor of Junie's kitchen at the words electrical fire, 3rd floor, evacuation underway. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I simply ran the 6 blocks to the Spire with my documentation folder clutched in my burned hand, because whatever was happening there, the residents sat directly above the clinic, and Cassia slept on the floor just beneath it. The lobby was chaos, staff pouring out past me while I fought my way in against the current, badge gone, credentials revoked. Nothing but sheer will getting me past a guard who recognized me and, God bless him, chose not to stop me. I found Talia Reyes, Cassia's head of security, on the 28th floor landing, radio pressed to her ear, face carved from granite. She went back in, Talia said the second she saw me, and something in her flat professional composure cracked. Server room's on fire, half the medical records are backed up there and nowhere else, and she went in after them herself instead of waiting for the crew. Because she's exactly stubborn enough to think she owes this building more than she owes her own life. Where, Ren? You can't. Where, Talia? She told me. I went. The server room on the 29th floor was thick with smoke by the time I reached it. Sprinklers fighting a losing battle against something accelerant-fed and stubborn, and I found Cassia on her knees in front of a half-melted rack of drives, coughing, one hand pressed to a gash along her hairline where a falling panel had caught her, refusing, even now, even here, to leave without the records that would clear my name. Cassia. I found it. Her voice was wrecked with smoke, triumphant anyway. The backup drive, the original logs, before Ferris's people touched them. It's all here. I was wrong not to trust you. I was wrong. I am so sorry. The ceiling above the server rack groaned, the specific sound I had heard exactly once before. 19 years old. My mother's kitchen. 4 seconds that had felt like a lifetime. And I did not think. I simply moved, throwing my full weight into Cassia's shoulder and driving us both clear as a support beam came down exactly where she'd been kneeling a half second before. We hit the floor together, her drive clutched safe against her chest, my burned hand instinctively coming up between her face and the shower of sparks that followed the beam down. An old scar meeting new fire and holding, the way it had always held, the way it was built to. Tell me you're not hurt, she said, hoarse, hands already searching my face, my arms, frantic in a way I had never once seen the Ember Queen allow herself to be in public. I'm not hurt, Cassia. We have to move. Now, we moved. Talia's team met us at the stairwell with masks and hands enough to half carry us both down 29 flights, while the sprinkler system finally caught up to the fire above, and by the time we reached the street, ash streaked and soot dark and alive, Cassia Drager had my burned hand locked in both of hers, and would not, for the length of the ambulance ride, let go. I nearly lost you the exact way I lost her, she said into my hair, shaking now that the danger had passed, allowed finally to shake. I stood at a perimeter once and watched a building take the person I loved. I was not doing it a second time. I don't care what it costs this company. I don't care what it costs me. Tell me to stop being afraid of this, and I will try, Ren. I swear to you I will try. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid, I said, pressing my forehead to hers. Smoke and rain, wet stone, and black tea all around us. The scent of her flooding warm now instead of cold, love instead of grief. I'm asking you to be afraid next to me instead of behind a mask. That's all I ever wanted. The drive survived. The truth survived with it. 3 days later, in a conference room packed with press Cassia had summoned herself, she stood at a podium with the recovered server logs projected 12 feet high behind her and dismantled Holt Ferris's frame with the same cold precision she brought to every boardroom battle she'd ever won. Except this time, her voice shook. Just slightly, with something that was not composure at all. Dr. Ferris altered clinical logs to protect himself from a decade-old negligence claim that killed a physician named Aletta Sten and cost her most promising resident her license, Cassia said, gray eyes flat and merciless on the cameras. That resident is Ren Calloway. She has spent 4 years rebuilding a life out of a lie he told to save himself. And 3 months ago, she saved a man's life in the gravel outside my own building while I watched. I will not stand here and let this company profit from what was done to her. Ferris was escorted from the building in handcuffs before the press conference ended, board oversight already unraveling the decade of malpractice he'd buried under other people's ruined names. Marcus Voss, exposed for the removed camera and the doctored access logs he'd helped falsify at Ferris's request, resigned within the hour rather than face the same cameras. I watched it all from the wings, my burned hand bandaged from the fire, my chest tight with something too large for relief alone to name, and when Cassia stepped down from the podium, she walked straight past every reporter reaching for a statement, and did not stop until she reached me. "I should have believed you the moment you told me," she said, quiet now. Just for me, the whole ruined, careful armor of her laid open in front of a room full of cameras that no longer mattered to either of us. I let my fear of losing this company outweigh my certainty about you, and I am not going to spend whatever time you'll give me making that mistake again. "You came back for me," I said. "In the fire. That's the part I'll remember. I will always come back for you." Her hand found mine, careful over the fresh bandage, thumb resting exactly where it had that first night in the library. I built an empire out of ash because I thought that was the only way to survive losing someone. You taught me, in 3 months, that surviving isn't the same as living, and I would burn the whole thing down again gladly if it meant keeping you instead. She knelt right there in the hallway, in front of cameras neither of us could stop, and from her coat pocket produced a small velvet box that had clearly been carried for longer than a single reckless afternoon. "Ask me with your words," I said, half laughing, half in tears, echoing the gait she'd taught me weeks before. Wren Calloway. Her voice, for the first time since I'd met her, carried no armor at all. "Will you bond with me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being careful with exactly this hand and every other part of you, in front of anyone who's watching and every single time no one is?" Yes, the word came easier than any I had ever spoken. Yes, Cassia. The bonding took place on the rooftop of the spire 6 weeks later, on the exact spot where the old warehouse district's water tower had once stood before the fire that took it. Now, a garden Cassia had planted herself over the winter. Cinnamon pear trees she'd had shipped in, because I'd mentioned once, offhand, that my mother used to make hand pies from that exact fruit every autumn before the wiring in her kitchen ever failed us. "Mrs." Odell cried through the entire short ceremony. Junie stood as my witness in a dress she swore she'd never wear again after this, muttering the whole time about diner regulars, who wouldn't believe this if she told them. Talia Reyes, who had spent 3 months treating me with the flat suspicion of a woman who trusted no one near her employer, presented me at the reception with a small wrapped box that turned out to contain a set of surgical instruments engraved with my name and the words for the doctor this city almost lost. "In 15 years, Talia said, gruff, refusing to meet my eyes as she said it, I never once saw her wait for anyone. She waited 3 months for you to trust her enough to let her in. Don't waste it." "I don't intend to," I said, and meant it entirely. Cassia said her vows plainly, the way she said everything, 3 sentences that undid me more than any speech could have. I spent 5 years building monuments to my own grief and calling it strength. You taught me love was never the danger. Control mistaken for safety was. I choose you, Wren, every day, on purpose, the way you chose to run toward fire instead of away from it. The bite came at the reception's quiet end, both of us alone on the rooftop under a sky finally clear of smoke, her mouth at my scent gland and mine at hers, the old consent gate passing between us one final time. "Tell me to stop, and I will," she murmured against my skin. "Don't stop," I said. And she didn't, and the bond snapped into place between us like something long overdue finally settling home, warm where it had once been careful, certain where it had once been afraid. A year on, I stood in the reopened wing of Ashcombe Medical, my license fully restored after the board's public reckoning with Ferris's decade of buried malpractice, a plaque near the entrance bearing Dr. Aletta Sten's name where it had always belonged. I ran the trauma unit now, not the charity clinic, and every intern who walked through my door got the same speech Dr. Sten had once given me about 11 minutes and what you did with them. Cassia met me most evenings at the clinic doors, coat traded these days for something softer. The Ember Queen still feared in every boardroom in the city, and somehow entirely undone in the particular quiet of our kitchen, where she had learned, slowly, to cook badly and laugh about it. That final morning, before the world woke fully around us, I found her on the rooftop garden among the cinnamon pear trees, watching the sun come up gold over a skyline she had once built purely out of grief, and now, finally, seemed to see as something closer to home. She took my burned hand in both of hers, without gloves, without hesitation, and pressed her mouth to the worst of the scarring the way she had that first night in the library, gentle and certain and entirely unafraid. "No more hiding this," she said. "No more hiding either of us," I answered, and meant it, watching the light climb over the glass towers of a city that had, against every likely ending, finally learned how to hold both fire and tenderness in the same steady hand. It was never the scar that made her afraid. It was the fear of losing what dared to be soft in a world that had taught her softness always burned. What saved us both was simpler than either of us expected, someone willing to stay in the fire long enough to prove that being seen, completely and on purpose, was worth every scar it cost to get there. The end. If a story about a burned hand and a queen who finally let herself be afraid out loud found its way into your chest tonight, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you too. I'd love to know in the comments which moment undid you most, the gravel rescue, the library confession, or the rooftop vow. Come back soon, because there's another quiet, devalued heart out there about to be seen completely. And I can't wait to tell you her story next.